Good morning, everybody. It's me, Spencer Lee, back with another video. It is one of those crisp, clear mornings here in the islands. Very light wind, so of course go to a pond and shoot some bridge reflections. Out here with Ed, and yeah, just gonna set up the camera, do a nice super wide angle shot here. Let me show you guys what we're working on here. I'll set up a quick video to show you guys the composition. But basically, this is 24 mil, and you can see how wide and how vast all these mountains are. And of course, you want to get two shots in one, so we're gonna just kind of put the camera in the middle and zoom out, and then boom, you can see how much of these mountains we can actually get in the frame. It looks super sick. There's all this huge empty space on the top and on the bottom, but we'll just crop in and make the most of it. But yeah, it makes for a super duper crazy nice panoramic. I'm debating about whether or not I want to do a time lapse or if I want to do a panorama. I can't make up my mind. So I got the 12 to 24 on the A7 IV doing a nice super wide angle time lapse of the scene. And in the meantime, we are going to be using the panoramic head, this one right here, and the 16 to 35 to do a nice panorama. All right, so we on the iPhone now. We're just doing our first initial panorama, and I think it's looking pretty good. We're doing 30-second exposure, so the water just ends up looking super duper smooth. But wow, this like first initial glow is just perfect. Oh, so pretty, so gorgeous. You're even getting some light ray action right now. Oh, it's so cool. That's awesome. There is the light and this beautiful, beautiful red glow happening right now. Basically, for panels, always just want to focus once, lock that focus, and then keep that focus for the entire time you're doing the panorama. Usually you just focus to infinity or focus on the furthest part in the frame. But holy smokes, this glow is epic! So pretty. little bit of a test real quick. So light is probably at its best right about now. We're gonna do these 50 megapixel panoramas are not going to compare to the shots that we get with the drone and the iPhone, but we'll do a little bit of a test. We'll compare the panoramas that we just took with a 48 megapixel vertical panorama with the drone, and then we'll do a 48 megapixel panorama with the iPhone as well, and we will see which one comes out the best. You guys will be the judge of that. So can these phones and these technologies outperform the peak technology of cameras, the Sony A1 with 50 megapixels, the best of the best when it comes to full frame cameras versus iPhones and drones? We'll see which one comes out on top. So we're back here on our computer, and let's see, let me start this screen recording here on this computer, but let's compare the files that we got from the one shoot we had at the Kahulu Pond, and we'll see how the iPhone holds up in comparison to everything else. So we took 3 different images. We're gonna put this one up on the screen now. This image was taken with the Sony A1, this bad boy right here. Focus. The Sony A1. Looks pretty good, looks nice and clean. If we zoom in on all the detail, it's pretty sharp throughout, front to back. No real issues, no issues in the shadows. I mean, this is kind of like to be expected, right? You have the best of the best full frame camera. It shouldn't give us any sort of image quality issues if we did everything technically correct in the field. The next shot that we have here is with the DJI Mini 3. So it's not as exactly the same angle. Here, I'll show you the new Mini 3 there. Boom. It's not the exact same angle, but we can kind of compare it to the Sony A1, and if we look at it, just by eyeballing it, if we're zoomed out all the way back here, it looks pretty good. It looks very similar. But if we punch in and if we zoom in a little bit more, you can really start to see the detail kind of fall off once you kind of reach towards the mountains here. The sharpness in comparison to the Sony A1, if we compare it side by side, the drone shot, which is on the left here, the drone shot appears to be even maybe a little bit sharper than the Sony A1, and that sharpness is not necessarily, what's the word? It's not necessarily appealing. It's not a appealing level of sharpness. It looks over sharpened, and from what I've been experiencing with the Mavic, the Mini 3, is that the sharpness on the images looks almost over sharpened to a certain extent, especially when shooting in that 48 megapixel mode. So something to consider, but it actually looks really, really similar, surprisingly. All right, now let's take a look at our final image. This one, of course, is taken with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the brand new one. This was taken using the 48 megapixel Apple Pro RAW camera on here. So yeah, if we take a look and compare it, let's see. This one too, it looks okay. It doesn't look crazy good. It doesn't also look crazy bad, especially if you look at this frame from super ultra wide. You know, it looks very, very nice, looks very sharp. I would say that it almost looks very similar to the Mini 3. It almost looks over sharpened if you look at it from a wider field of view. Now if we compare it to the Sony A1 here, we have the iPhone on the left, Sony A1 on the right. Just by looking at it at the eyeball test, it really looks like the iPhone looks super over sharpened. So if we compare side by side, you can see that the Sony A1 has really some nice sharp detail, but it's not too over sharpened, it's not too overcooked. When in comparison to the iPhone, if we punch in kind of just to about there, you can see that there is a lot of contrast going on here in the shadows, a lot of unnecessary contrast, a lot of sharpening up here on the ridges. It looks like artificial sharpening. And that's the thing with these newer technologies that are coming out. As nice as the 48 megapixels sounds, it's kind of like an artificial 48 megapixels, at least when it compares to, you know, landscape photography and all of that. I'm sure in more controlled situations where you have like studio lighting, you know, the artificial intelligence and the artificial sharpening probably does a little bit of a better job. But at least for landscape photography, it does seem like the detail at least is kind of a little bit exaggerated in my sense. But if we zoom out and look at it from a wide point of view, it's almost indistinguishable, which is really nice. So yeah, those are the shots shooting away from the sun. If you're shooting, of course, not directly into the sun, but we also tested that as well. So let's go back into the field and we'll show you guys what we got when shooting into the sun. Okay, well, good morning everybody. We are out here today at Makapu. Ooh, and that's a big water flow for sunrise this morning. We have a nice pre-sunrise glow happening right now. And the sun is actually supposed to be rising just off of the left side of Makapu Point. So hopefully the skies remain clear. We can get some nice water flow in the foreground and get a nice sun star right here on this point. The reason why we're out here today is to just kind of test out the iPhone camera versus an actual mirrorless camera, or you know, something with a bigger sensor like the Sony A1, and just trying to see if it can hold up when shooting directly into the sun. So we're in a pretty sketchy area, so hopefully we don't get the camera wet. So basically, very, very simple. The sun is supposed to rise around here alongside this cliff. So we're just gonna wait until that happens and we can see a nice sun star coming across the side of the cliff. Now, in the foreground, what you see right now is a tide pool. But this tide pool turns very quickly into crashing waves when the waves crash in, just like that. So what I'm hoping for is a wave that's big enough to crash in that creates waterfalls all over on these rocks over here. Maybe even some water flow coming across these two rocks over here. So fingers crossed that happens. Basically just a straight shot, nothing too fancy, nothing too crazy, but we're set up pretty low to the ground, as you can tell. So hopefully we can stay as dry as possible. The tide is coming up, so we do have to be a little bit careful with the water, but I think we'll be okay from right here. And yeah, when that sun does get a little bit brighter, definitely take out the iPhone, snap away at some photos. Oh, here comes a big one. Woo! That's a lot of water. Yeah, that was a good one. This is a good one. Okay, so you can see where the sun is going to rise up from. And yeah, we're pretty far off our estimate. But regardless, we'll be taking the shot once it ends up coming over that layer of clouds. There we go. There's the sun. All right, time to get our shots. The waves just need to come right now. Give me something. Oh, Manini kind. Manini action. Come on. Come on, ocean waves, do something. I actually think this shot is gonna look better if we do a horizontal. We'll try and do this at the same time. Take iPhone shots and shots with the camera. The only thing I don't really like about the iPhone camera is that it's really difficult to do long exposures with. Because like right now, especially in these situations, I have a filter on my camera. I have no filter on this. So in order to get by without a filter, I would say, you have to shoot it in live mode, and then that just defeats the whole purpose. You have a camera that's 48 megapixels, but you can't really take a long exposure with it. So if that is one limitation of the iPhone, that would be the limitation. Maybe this one? Perhaps? All right, that worked out. That was pretty good. It smashed the camera, so it must have been doing something right. All right, well, we'll take it back to the computer and see how they compare with each other. I hate shooting around salt water. Okay, so now let's look at the photos that we got from Makabu from shooting directly into the sun. Now, disclaimer, these are not the best seascape photos that I've taken before. I intentionally did not shoot this as technically perfect as I could, just to kind of make this test fair in a sense. So if we take a look at the Sony A1 files, it looks okay. It's obviously blown out, and the reason why I didn't do any like exposure blending or any bracketing is because I felt that it'd be a better test to kind of just test a single exposure, so kind of exposing kind of like mid between highlights and shadow detail, seeing how much highlight detail we can pull down from each file and how much shadow information we can pull up from each file. Just a single exposure versus a single exposure, and no fancy exposure blending or bracketing. But in a normal situation, I definitely would have bracketed this shot. So let's take a look. The Sony A1 file looks pretty good. Shadow information looks solid. You know, we kind of exposed we definitely blew out the sky a little bit, but we kind of did a pretty good job about exposing the shadows. Nothing looks too deep, too clipped, but our highlight detail is definitely gone in the sky. But you know, there's a lot of nice detail in the rocks. You know, 50 megapixel straight shot, you know what you're gonna get. Even if we look at a shot that was taken a few seconds before this one, you can see there's a lot of detail in the water. You know, not the best water flow by any means, but there's still a lot of detail going on. And like I said in the field, one of the limitations, or one of the things that the camera still has over the iPhone, is the ability to have more control over your long exposure shots. You could screw on a filter on the iPhone and try to kind of fiddle with it to really get the nice long exposure, but then at that point the iPhone would be kicking itself into night mode, and that's not necessarily the desired effect that you want. In this case, we want our shutter speed to be anywhere from like 0.8 of a second to like 1/5 of a second, and you really don't have that manual control with the iPhone. If you put the thing into cinematic mode, the iPhone into cinematic mode, you do have manual control over our f-stop. Like if we can go from like 2.8 to like 4.5 and all of that. But if that manual control ever does come to the iPhone, I'm sure it would be a different story, and I'd be very eager to test that out. But let's take a look at the iPhone files just in case. So obviously, in order to get a true, like the actual long exposure shot, I had to take a live photo, which instead of shooting at 48 megapixels now, I lose the raw information. I drop down to a 12 megapixel file. And of course, when that happens, you definitely do not get as much detail in the shot. So as you can see, if we zoom in, it looks super blurry. It looks really, really, really bad. There really isn't there is a little bit of artificial sharpening going on, but it's still not enough to compare to side by side with the Sony A1. So unfortunately, if you're shooting a lot of seascapes, zoom in, like this does not compare, you know. This does not compare at all. But yeah, that's the iPhone shots. So that seascape test at Makapu did a good job about demonstrating, you know, comparing long exposure taking versus the camera versus the iPhone. But if we actually wanted to compare raw files shooting directly into the sun, those 48 megapixel Apple Pro RAW files versus the Sony A1 RAW files, then maybe that would be a little bit better of a comparison, I would say. If you take the long exposure part out of the equation, then how much would it hold up? So we took the cameras up to do a sunset hike later on that day, and this is the stuff that we got. Let me try to get out of this wind. It's pretty ridiculous. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. All right, oh, here we are, nice and cozy. Today we are out here with Walt hiking the Pully Notches, and let me see if we can get a good view behind us. This view is looking super windy, but this view is looking absolutely fantabulous, fantastically epic. Woo, check out that mountain view behind me. That is nice.
Get the
notch in the picture. So we were gonna set up over there, but as you can see, there's some other hikers down there. So we're gonna actually set up.
At least you can get the mountain.
Yeah, a full view of the mountain on this side. So we're gonna go a little bit further up and start setting up, because that light is starting to kick off. We're gonna wanna start taking a time lapse already. Ooh, few bushes. There we go. I am that dumb person that dangles their $6,000 camera off the edge of a cliff like this. This one's a stupid idea for sure. But oh, that light in the back of the valley there looks so good. Should take some 100 to 400 shots of that bad boy. Woo! Check it out. Wow. Oh my gosh, look at those light rays. We are witnessing epicness right here, ladies and gentlemen. And we got the time lapse set up just in time. Holy smokes, that is crazy. Woo. Getting some epic light on both sides. Got that nice light beam coming through. Need to snap those 100 to 400 shots, but we're getting the drone ready to fly in a little bit. But this is looking so good right now. So epic. Oh my gosh, the light is beaming directly at us in our face. Got the drone up in the air back there. Got a couple of good shots, but holy smokes, this is really nice. This is definitely more than we asked for when we came up here. Woohoo! So good, so good. We even got a nice little sun star right there. Bang. Bye-bye. All right, well, I think that's pretty much all the light. That's all she wrote. So we'll take these files back and we'll compare them, but whoo, welcome back to the mountains is what Mother Nature said to us here today. But my goodness, what an epic sunset that was. Wow, so good, so good. So as you guys saw in the video, we set the Sony A1 up on a time lapse, just doing single exposures, no exposure blending, no bracketing or anything like that. So I decided to take quick little snapshots with the iPhone as well as the Mini 3, just to do, again, a little bit of a comparison. This may be a little bit more fair towards the iPhone because instead of comparing JPEGs to RAW files, we're comparing RAW files to RAW files, if that makes sense. So let's open up the files and see how they came out. So if we look at the first one, this is the single exposure from the time-lapse with the Sony A1. And to be honest, this thing looks so good. Now, I was exposing just slightly higher for the highlights, like +1 exposure, 1 stop of light above highlights. And the fact that I was able to recover a good amount of highlight detail here in the shot, it really does look good. Let's take a look at the RAW file and compare it to kind of like a before and after here. Here it is. There we go. This is the before shot. This is the after. So as you can see, we're exposing a lot for the highlights, but the fact that we're able to pull up all of the shadow information, that is really nice. So yeah, highlight detail looks good. Shadow detail looks good. It is a little bit noisy since I had to pull up those shadows. But it's not bad. It has a good amount of noise in there for ISO 100, a good amount of detail as well. So there's a little bit of a noise, obviously, because we had to pull up the shadows. But so far it looks pretty good. Now, let's look at the next shot here. This shot is actually with the iPhone, so it's not going to be as wide because with the iPhone, at least right now, you're limited to only shoot that 48 megapixel RAW with the 24mm main lens, so it is a little bit of a tighter view. Now, it was very interesting editing this file because I thought that I had exposed this shot towards the highlights, but as you can see, especially here on this left side of the frame, the highlights are still a bit blown out. Let's take a look at the RAW file. So this is the RAW file. If we take a look at the before, I thought that it did a pretty good job of exposing for this highlight area, but it was still blown out. And so I had to do a lot of finagling and a lot of editing to kind of bring back life into this photo. And, give the iPhone credit. The shadow information looks cleaner than the Sony A1, but I did lose all of this highlight detail, so that was a bummer. But it does actually do a surprisingly good job about recovering all of those shadow information, especially when exposing towards the highlights. So I think maybe next time I just have to do a better job of exposing the shot towards the highlights. But if we take a look back at the finished product, sharpness-wise, again, it looks really good if you look at it just from a wider view, but as you punch in closer, you can definitely see that there is a lot of that artificial sharpening. And if you take a look at the even more darker and shadowy areas, you can definitely see that the sharpness falls off over here. This really looks more like a painting than a photograph, I would say. It's very nice, very noise-free, but the detail is kind of just not there. So let's compare it to the iPhone, or compare the iPhone to the A1. Again, if we punch in, you can definitely see over-sharpened. Obviously, the AI did a little bit of sharpening and denoising here. But then really the comparison is this area over here, this part of the frame. You can see that, yes, this is dark and this is noisy, but it looks a little bit more natural than this kind of artificial painting looking kind of thing here. And then, of course, the big kicker for me is all of this highlight detail. If I kind of expose these two shots very similarly, the Sony A1 definitely does a better job about recovering highlights. And, comparing it to the best of the best really isn't fair. One of the things that I always tell my friends is that the Sony A1 is one of those cameras that is really, really good at recovering highlight information, more so than any other camera that I've ever tried. So it is is obviously is a little bit of an unfair comparison because I've never had anything that recovers highlight detail quite like the Sony A1. But if I exposed everything just the same, took a single exposure, we are comparing it side by side, so we have to note that comparison as well. But yeah, let's go back and take a look at the last one, which is a 48 megapixel panorama from the air with the drone. And you know, this one actually kind of looks, in my opinion, if we just compare it side by side, it actually looks the best in terms of just the straight up exposure. I think the drone did a good job about balancing enough highlight information and not over processing the shadows and making it nice and clean. So, you know, kudos to the drone, to DJI, for whatever you know, raw processing system they're using within their cameras. It does start to look a little bit of a painting up here, a little bit of that artificial denoising, a lot of artificial sharpening, but so, you know, this file did a surprisingly good job of balancing everything. Again, but the only problem is this highlight information here. Again, I swore I was exposing for the highlights as best I can, but apparently I didn't do that well of a job. But yeah, those smaller sensors do not do as well of a job of recovering highlight information. But then again, the Sony A1 does an outstanding job, better than any camera I've ever tried. If we compare it side by side, if we look towards the middle of the frame, in my opinion, the drone looks a lot better than the Sony A1, surprisingly. And then towards the edge and towards this side of the information, you can start to see a little bit of that artificial sharpening, but it's nice, it's controlled, it's balanced. Not like the iPhone. Let's not compare this one, but compare this to this. Yeah. If we compare it to the iPhone does bring back a little bit more highlight information if we compare it. But once you kind of hit this middle part of the image, you definitely can start to see all of that processing going on here, whereas this on the drone, it feels a lot more natural. And especially when you get into the dark areas, that over processing, that artificial intelligence, whatever they're using, is coming out a lot more on the iPhone in comparison to the drone. So there you have it. Comparing three different cameras, three of the quote-unquote best cameras in their class, I would say. Beginner drone, pro iPhone, and pro camera. I don't know, let me know what you guys think. It is nice to have the ability to capture very high quality, detailed information out of all three cameras, to be quite honest. You just have to know what situations the phone is going to perform best in, shooting away from the sun, not shooting into the sun. You know, the physical capabilities of having a 35mm sensor in comparison to like a, I don't know, 1-inch sensor that's on the drone and on the iPhone, it's going to make a big difference when it comes to image quality. But these things definitely are getting close, and I hope that one day I can put away this big bulky camera and all of these big bulky lenses and go out with the iPhone and take, you know, very, very similar images. The technology is definitely getting there. It's not quite there yet though, especially when it comes to like control, long exposures, recovering highlight information. Those are the main points that the mirrorless and the full frame cameras are going to have over the iPhones, at least right now. But thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this vlog. We'll start doing more travel vlogs kind of here and there in the next upcoming weeks or so, whenever I can get the time to sit down and edit. But yeah, that's it for me today. Thanks for watching. Hit the like button, comment below, subscribe if you aren't already, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.